Hey there, folks. Welcome to Shelf Life. I'm Kimberly Dykman. And as we always promise, we give you the sort of the backstories of some of the best literature that is hitting the shelves today and making it to your coffee table and hopefully on your gift-giving lists. We focus on real people, the folks behind the literature. We focus on the real purpose behind them getting their message out, and we enlighten you with the real perspective of how it totally touches everyone that throws their eyes on the book, let alone on these interviews. And I am really honored to bring my next guest. He goes by R.B. Mitchell. We can call him Rob. He is the author of Castaway Kid, and he is a surviving lifer from the American orphanage system who's a wonderfully successful senior VP at a nationally renowned brokerage firm. And I'm very jazzed to invite you to meet Rob Mitchell. Thank you so much for coming on out.
Thank you, Kimberly. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So tell us about Castaway Kid.
When I was 3 years old, my father abandoned my mother and I, put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger, and blew out part of his brains. But Kimberly, he didn't kill himself, and for the next 26 years was a walking vegetable in a mental hospital. My mother had enormous emotional and psychological problems that she had masked, but as often in marriage, those masks come down. And 3 months after his failed suicide, she drugged me by train from Chicago and abandoned me at an Illinois orphanage in Princeton, Illinois. I stayed there unrescued for 14 years. And it was a long, difficult childhood, but ultimately I found hope. And that hope helped me rise above my childhood to become whole emotionally, psychologically, socially, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm. So you are the Castaway Kid.
I am the Castaway Kid, yes.
And the story itself kind of gives the play-by-play of the life in the orphanage and all the things that went around that.
Yeah, most of our images of orphanage life are all fictional characters. Oliver Twist, Anne of Green Gables,
Right.
Little Orphan Annie.
Right.
And yet the storyline in all those is they were rescued by somebody who was rich. The reality of most children like myself is we're not rescued. And I didn't want to write a case study. I really want to try and take the reader into the confusion, the frustration, the anger, the loneliness of the abandoned child. And I'm just one of hundreds of thousands in America.
One of your favorite quotes is by Booker T. Washington. And the quote is, "Character, not circumstances, makes the man." And I guarantee that if people hear this quote and then they go and they read the book, they're going to see that you've actually breathed life into that quote because you've really, it defines you, or you define it.
We ultimately have choices. And as Booker T was born an African slave, he never knew who his father was. Grew up on mud floors.
Right.
First bed he went college. Here's a man who should be angry and bitter about the lot he had in life. And he made a choice to be different than how he was defined in his childhood. And he's one of my heroes.
One of the biggest points of the Christian faith is one word called forgiveness. And you really showcase that in the book. What was your experience like to finally say, I'm going to do that?
I didn't want to do that. I didn't. My grandmother Mitchell was dead. My father's a walking vegetable, so he'll never know he's forgiven. And my mother was not sane enough to know. So the three people who wounded me the most would never know they were forgiven. And mother was the most difficult, but once I honestly and genuinely forgave them, which was a process, not a point in time, then I became free.
Yeah.
And I became free to become the person God called me to be.
So the book's been out for a little while, and if people flip over the back, you've got some significant endorsements here from Brian Littrell, who's a member of the Backstreet Boys that everyone should probably know of, and Dave Ramsey, New York Times bestseller author as well. Why do you think it's got such a profound effect on folks right off the bat?
I think it speaks to that wounded child in each of us. Who remembers being alone, I remember this big Irishman coming up to me and saying, I didn't get into your book to the bullies. And then start telling me the stories where he was bullied in his childhood. And he said, then you had me. I think there's a longing for hope. The Bible says God has created a longing for eternity in each of our hearts. And I think all of us want to think no matter what the circumstances of life are, there's still hope. So I'm finding that men, women, old, young, of all races, there's some emails from boys in boys' prison who are saying, okay, if you can do it, I can do it. If you can do it, I can do it. So I'm grateful we're on our 7th printing now, and it's connecting to people who want to know there is honest, genuine, not false, la-la, tree-hugging hope, but real, genuine hope.
Right, and it's filling that void.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned this website called A Million Little Proofs, and those of us in the publishing world and in the media world get a little chuckle out of that because we think, smart guy, he put some evidence out there to support his claims, so to speak. What is that like to feel like you had to put some proof out there that this memoir is valid?
I was speaking at a fundraiser for the orphanage in the early 90s, and the director said, look, you were never a ward of the state, so you can look at all your caseworker records. Now, I was there 14 years, from age 3 to 17. You know, my kids have photo albums and video recordings. I have caseworker notes, psychiatrist notes. It's a strange childhood album.
Right.
And I kept tagging some that night, for copies for myself, and over I said, if you ever wrote a book, nobody would believe you. And that's when God started really hammering me to write the book, and I kept fighting God. So I went back to those documents along the way to make sure the timeline was correct, because it's such a strange story. Then to get the emotional and spiritual timeline interwoven with that.
Right.
When I started shopping the book, I had some of these documents with the book. I just simply called them proof documents. And about that time, some major controversies came out, and I already had these documents. I already had video recordings of several people involved to answer questions, including Nola, my dorm mother, and I did it because of who I am, not because of some other controversies.
Right.
Well, I have a bit of a impish sense of humor sometimes, Kimberly, and I just couldn't resist calling that site, because I was already ready to build it anyway, just because of who I am, A Million Little Proofs. And in there, the reader will find the caseworker notes on the day I was abandoned, along the way, psychiatric notes after I was kidnapped and put in prison. A variety of other documents are on there in PDF, as well as audio recordings, because I don't want to take away from the message of hope with having inflated events, because the events of my childhood were so bizarre.
You've risen above all of this. You've put a message out there for hopefully millions to learn from and to embrace. You're now, as silly as it sounds, this incredible success story.
Yes.
You handle Uber dollars for people, helping them get their life in order, financially at least. You've got a wonderful home life, and yet you're still wanting to do more. You realize that God put you here to do something, and this is like just the tip of the iceberg. So what is next, truly, in the shelf life of Rob Mitchell?
At the moment, I'm not in a big hurry to write another book.
And that's okay.
But if I did, it would probably be something along the way of helping ordinary people see how you can build ethical wealth.
In America, or
in
just
America.
generally?
Yeah.
It's going to need a series on that.
Well, perhaps, but you know, I walked out of an orphanage and I'm a multimillionaire, and I didn't do it by cheating people. I didn't do it by, lying or stealing. I didn't do it by putting my competitor out of business. I did it once again, as Booker T. Washington said, the person who adds value will never be in want.
Thank you again for taking the time.
Thank you.
This was awesome.
Thank you.
You almost made me cry. Almost made me cry. And again, you've been watching Shelf Life. I'm Kimberly Dykman. Thanks so much for joining us. Run out and get Castaway Kid, and we'll see you very soon.